West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
In its light. There are two readings today, and the first is from David Corton. David Corton is an American author, and I understand he may have written about 12 different books. He's a former professor of Harvard Business School, a political activist, and a critic of corporate globalization. And the reading is, the current self-destructive system distracts us from its failure by forcing us to compete to obtain the money to survive or to buy the next consumer trinket. As a result, we rarely step back to reflect on the nature and meaning of life, on how our human experience can and should allow us to experience expansive love and the fulfillment that comes from lives of service to the well-being of our neighbour, earth, and thereby of ourselves. Our second reading is from Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations between 1997 and 2006. Apart from his well-known involvement in peacekeeping, he also was involved in the reforming of the United Nations bureaucracy, and he worked tirelessly to combat HIV/AIDS, especially in Africa. And he has this to say: we must face up to an inescapable reality. The challenges of sustainability simply overwhelm the adequacy of our responses. With some honourable exceptions, our responses are too few, too little, and too late. Offered as wisdom for the journey, maybe walk in its light. And it's back to Donna for our next song.
I'm usually the one yelling at everybody else to speak into the microphone, so.
Can you do a check, please?
Yes, can people hear me at home? It's not close enough. Not close enough. Check one, check two. So in addition to introducing Andrew Welch today, I am an ad hoc member of the tech team. And so thank you for all your patience this morning. We've had a significant upgrade in technology, but you wouldn't know it. But that's the way technology works, though, right? If you don't use it, you'll lose it. So we're starting to use it, so it's going to get better and better and better. So thank you for your patience. But I am here today to introduce my friend Andrew Welch. Andrew has been here 2 times already, and he's had the formal introductions already. So I decided I wanted to introduce you to more of the Andrew that I know, rather than the Andrew of the accomplishments in corporate. And good news, Andrew, is I was going to do video. You'd be surprised what I have. But I'll keep it to speeches. I tried to think of all the intersections in life that Andrew and I have. We've known each other probably closing in on 30 years, and I made a list. We both come from the corporate training world. We're both interested in service dogs. We both have experience working at the same youth leadership centers. We're both interested in theater and film creation. We're both interested in RCMP and RCMP history. We have been friends on random Saturday nights over at each other's houses for dinner. We've watered each other's plants. And most importantly, we now share West Hill. So I'm super happy that Andrew has been here. I'm not surprised by the reaction to him speaking, that people engage with him. I know Andrew quite well also as a performer. If you ever get an opportunity to see his Christmas Carol, when he reads at one-person show, it is well worth it. Right from Marley is Dead to God Blesses Everybody, like he holds you the entire time, and it's really worth something seeing. One of the most important performances I've seen Andrew do is a performance of Freddie the Rock. So Freddie the Rock is a song sung at a summer camp which has the most boring lyrics ever, and the lyrics are as such. Freddie the Rock goes, he's a rock, he doesn't do anything, he just doesn't, okay? He doesn't laugh or sing, he doesn't do anything, he looks at me and goes, nothing, right? And when Andrew performs it, the kids go crazy and they're demanding it over and over and over again all week long. So if you're ever at a party, make sure that you're asking Andrew to sing Freddie the Rock, or maybe after the talk today. The most important thing that I've learned about Andrew is that, through all those intersections, is absolutely under no circumstances go on after him. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you my very long-standing friend, Andrew Welch, who's going to continue his third of 3 talks with us scheduled at West Hill. Thank you.
Freddie the Rock is going through someone's windshield. Kidding. Moment, please. Of course.
Could we do a sound check with the Zoom people with you?
Check. Can you hear me at home? You're getting thumbs up. Good. See if I can get thumbs up at the end of everything. All right. Once upon a time, in the mid-1930s, a scholar by the name of Charles Elton was reviewing records of animal pelts brought into the Hudson's Bay Company. With accurate records dating back to the mid-1800s, the company had one of the longest data sets in ecology, indicating animal populations in a remote habitat. As such, it was very easy for Charles to spot a remarkably constant trend. Over the 100 years, the population of the snowshoe hare appeared to have gone up and down in a regular 8 to 10 year cycle, peaking at about 5 times its lowest value. He also noticed that the lynx population had the same cycle, with slightly less dramatic peaks that happened a year or 2 after the hare population peaked. What could explain this? The story of the lynx and hare cycle has a powerful message for where we are in history, and how everything I have talked about in the last 2 months can be brought to bear in very practical ways. Your immensely useful VisionWorks document describes the values that you ascribe to. Those are very fuzzy ideas. My particular passion is merging rational science with those fuzzy qualitative values and seeing where that takes us. And over the next 30 minutes, it may seem at times like we're moving through some thick mathematical weeds, as usual, but I promise that we'll glide easily over the dense entanglements, and there'll be some simple takeaways at the end. Simple, but provocative and sometimes surprising. I'll also share my ultimate recommendation for what we should all be working on right now. So thinking back to my perspective in October, I talked about how values based on numbers, where more is always better by definition, tend to curve upwards like this. Albert Bartlett, University of Colorado Professor Emeritus of Physics, made an interesting observation. The greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. So allow me to share a couple of interesting facts from the world of mathematics. Number one, anything that continually grows by any positive percentage will eventually double and keep doubling. Such growth is exponential, and if the percentage is relatively constant, will result in a smooth curve upwards. All growth. Also, last month, I told you that nothing in our environment works that way. There is no natural system where more is always better. I might also have implied that there are therefore no exponential curves in nature. Well, there are, but only up to a point. And that point is the point I need to make. Life as we know it is all about growth. Plants and animals grow in size. They produce seeds and offspring that in some cases suggest phenomenal population growth. What if every dandelion seed or every frog egg grew into a full adult organism? According to the math I just mentioned, every such example of growth will be exponential. And indeed, when Charles Elton looked at the graphs of lynx and hare populations, these were not smooth curves. They shot up and then they dropped down. Woomph, plonk, woomph, plonk, woomph, plonk, over and over again. They might even have been exponential curves. So, intuitively, we know that such resets must be the case. A fixed territory has limited resources. Unchecked exponential growth of any organism would quickly fill every square inch on our planetary surface. Only numbers themselves can grow that way. So what happens to such growth? Some cultures might assign powers to a higher being who looks down upon such explosive growth and sends forces to correct it. Even today, I have science colleagues who believe that Gaia has sentience. Well, perhaps she does. But such a conscious force is not necessary. Explosive growth always creates the circumstances for that growth to collapse. Nature does not send forest fires or disease to deal with mature forests that have no diversity of other species. The fires and disease are always there. It's just that they don't have the devastating regenerative impact until the forest has so few concentrated species that the cycle can kick in and clear out the old growth. Remember that. And make room for the diverse pioneer species to reestablish themselves. It is in the nature of the world that exponential growth creates the conditions for its own collapse. Too many snowshoe hares will exhaust the food supply and facilitate the spread of disease, at which point that population will collapse. If the lynx subsist on mainly eating hares, their population will be locked into the same cycle. Coming to a point here. Now, one important side note. All growth is eventually exponential, but the most dramatic exponential curves are created by positive feedback loops. This microphone amplifies my voice. If I carry it over to that speaker, we know that the microphone will amplify the sound already produced, escalating almost immediately into a high-pitched squeal feedback. But even such man-made science will hit a limit in the physical world. The squeal will reach a point and then not get any higher or any louder. It might even blow the speaker, and then there will be no amplification at all. Now, if we look at the graph of human population over the last 1,000 years, we see that exponential growth, like the red, has continued unchecked throughout that time. Humans are pretty clever. Inhospitable habitats, food and energy sources, disease, all of these negative feedbacks have been surmounted by human ingenuity. And as I've pointed out in the past, the value system that has been given overwhelming precedence in our society is quantitative. Unending economic growth, where more is always better. And what does that unending growth do? It produces more exponential curves for resource consumption and energy needs and the wealth of the few. There are other effects where money rules absolutely and everything is just business. We're not happy. Our humanity suffers. And congregations like West Hill turn to initiatives like VisionWorks to try and restore qualitative values. Now, that can work for individuals, but as Scott says, you aren't going to change society. Why not? The greatest barrier to comprehensive adjustment is our collective value systems, of our collective value systems, is what I call the value system change conundrum. Here's how it goes. You won't change your value system until you see the benefits of doing so. But because the benefits in the two value systems are polar opposites, you won't see the benefits of changing until you are already using the new value system. Catch-22. Climate change action, for example, is all very well, but only, it turns out, if it saves us money or creates jobs. Changing our value system to where money and jobs don't trump all decisions is not going to happen until we are no longer measuring success by number. For example, begging and inherited wealth aside, we all live in a contrived world where if you don't have money, you won't survive. For the vast majority, money comes from having a job. So those jobs are inextricably linked to our very survival. Since that is an integral attribute of our current value system, we are not going to see the benefits of a different value system if the implication is that we are sacrificing our jobs and thus our survival. There is only one sure way that our predominant value system might change, and that is if it fails catastrophically. If we're no longer receiving the benefits, we might look for benefits elsewhere. So some say that the greatest threat to our civilization is the climate emergency. I disagree. If we were to solve climate change tomorrow, we would still be heading down our numeric path of self-destruction. We'd still have the sixth great mass extinction, spiraling social inequity, biodiversity loss, pandemics, resource destruction, out of control artificial intelligence, you name it. My thesis is that we can trace each and every one of these catastrophes to our value crisis. Change the predominant value system, and they all become resolvable. If anyone tries to tell you that they can solve climate change while still creating jobs and growing the economy, they simply don't understand the real problem facing humanity. That said, our climate emergency is particularly scary for a reason which I've already discussed. If we had to, or were forced to, we could suspend economic growth, population growth, and growth of consumption. However, climate change is driven by positive feedback loops. Warm temperatures melt snow caps, resulting in less sunlight reflected away, resulting in more warmth. Melting permafrost releases methane, a greenhouse gas 25 times more powerful than CO2, which melts more permafrost, and so on. Some people believe it is already too late to effectively mitigate our climate emergency. I say it doesn't matter. Even if we are not too late now, we won't do enough until it is. Why? Because we choose not to. Choices are based on values, and the only real action against climate change will go against everything our number-based value system worships as sacrosanct. That especially applies in the realm of society's most powerful decision makers. This is our value crisis. That cruise ship is far too big to turn around. But I have good news. Remember what I said earlier? It is in the nature of the world we live in that exponential growth creates the conditions for its own collapse. Our values that have no concept of sufficiency are what created the climate emergency. And the climate emergency may just be the negative feedback loop that we so desperately need to reject them. That's a huge, loaded statement. I'll give it a second to sink in. Climate change is not just a problem, but it is possibly the solution to the real problem. Wait a minute. We're talking about cataclysmic weather events, devastation to infrastructure, crops destroyed, social unrest, death to thousands, if not millions. That feels horribly callous and uncompassionate. I didn't come up with this plan. I'm only reading the writing on the wall. When the snowshoe hare population hits its peak and collapses, tens of thousands of hares, 4 out of 5, die of starvation and disease. In the aftermath, 3 out of 4 lynx starve to death, and that's just the normal state of affairs where there's no interference of humans. Charles Elton provocatively stated at the time, "The balance of nature does not exist, and perhaps never has existed." No balance, just movement. We now know it to be an interconnected web of complex polarities constantly cycling from one pole to the other. There is no balance at the best of times, and humans have pushed the pendulum way off the scale. That has consequences. Yikes. What does that mean for a congregation that wants to make a difference? A community that wants to do good and to champion a different set of values? What should we do next? In VisionWorks, you ultimately champion love. That's great. But where do you best apply that? I struggled long and hard with this question and explored the ideas in my second book, and my answer for you today will likely seem a radical departure from everything I've talked about to date. In short, there will come a time, there must come a time, when the value system which dictates that more is always better will fail. The continuance of the human species may very well depend upon those who survive that failure to recognize that fact, to understand what led civilization to that point was a flawed set of number-based values that trumped justice and compassion and love, and the recognition of the interconnectedness of all things. These are important. And I suggest that you, as individuals and as a congregation, fight for the human right of survival. Eating, having a place to live, having time to pursue productive interests, having life choices. If survival, like health care, is a right, then it is not earned, it is granted. Civilization shouldn't be structured in such a way that you cannot eat or rest or dream or act without first being a veritable slave to the false god of economic growth and mindless consumption of resources, all in the name of creating jobs so that people can claim worth in society. So at one time, I depressingly thought that true change would only be possible after collapse. But it turns out that this pivotal concept underpinning modern techno-industrial society, the connection of jobs to survival, might just be malleable. Even as I speak, we at every level of government are now looking seriously at ways to sever that connection. And that might be a total game changer. What if money were simply a tool rather than our reason for being? How might we move towards that goal? The best answer is to introduce a universal basic living income. This was first proposed 400 years ago. It was almost implemented across the United States 50 years ago. Measures undertaken during COVID demonstrate that the time is now. Perhaps you have heard basic income discussed before. The key for me is that UBI is not about eradicating poverty or combating homelessness. It goes way beyond that. It is a paradigm shift. Yes, UBI would allow us to care for others, to have children, to survive between jobs. It would also allow us to grieve after loss, to move, to create art, to start businesses, to be ill, to be disabled, to leave abusive relationships, to rest, and to stop stressing about saving enough to live on when we are no longer working. I'm going to guess that for most of you, your working life is over. Perhaps you have never been seriously unemployed or homeless, or perhaps you have. I want you to think back to your most challenging times when life was a struggle for you. Now, imagine that during that time, every month, you received $1,000 from society, regardless of what you were earning or not. Now think back to the toughest life decisions you ever had to make. Think about those. How would those choices have been different if you knew that every month, if nothing else, that $1,000 would be there? This concept is possible. I could talk about it for hours, but that's now your homework. It is possible, and we have only proven the benefits under our existing value system paradigm. We can only guess at its potential for changing society as we know it. I'll share what I blogged on my website about the 4 biggest impacts on my own life. Firstly, I would absolutely acquire a healthier perception of money. A simple tool, but also an incentive to use it as a force of good. A basic income would also be something that I knew I had in common with everyone else equally. Secondly, remember my investor value persona from back in September, my presentation? My present investments are my future survival. I can't put them at risk, and they have to be chosen accordingly. With a UBI, I would invest according to my values instead. I would take risks and invest in what I believed in, not what I needed to guarantee my future survival. Thirdly, I would spend more money. In my life, I spend practically nothing. I mean, overconsumption is one thing, deprivation into misery is another. Well, that's me. With a UBI, I'd take better care of myself, where circumstances allowed, living in the moment. Fourthly, I would give more. A UBI is like a gift from society, and we know what gifts do. They inspire more giving. So UBI being a gift in itself, that statement says that society says you have value just by being you. Gifts inspire more giving. And these are the value changes that we need to have a practical implementation of the world we want. It's actually possible. It's not a partisan issue. It's being discussed on both sides. The Senate, the Canadian Senate, is talking about it right now. We have the potential for a world where justice, compassion, honesty, openness, integrity, courage, kindness, and forgiveness for self, others, and the planet reign supreme. So if I had to gather up everything I've talked about for 3 months into some kind of practical action, may I suggest you consider that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. It's always, when you talk, there's lots for us to consider. I kept thinking a very simple concept: enough is enough, and being able to recognize that enough is actually much harder to do than it is to say, because to get off this exponential belief where on a longer amount of time I need to be more wealthy versus I can be happy forever if I have enough, which is something that I'm thinking about. Thank you, Andrew, for not just for today, but for the last 2 times and 3 times told that you've come. And by all means, don't be a stranger, please. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah. So at this point, if there's questions from the hall, either in person or virtual, we will pray to the technology people and everything will hopefully work. I see, Morlin, your hand is up. You're talking, but we don't hear you.
Yes, I just started talking. Thank you.
Good.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. Our speaker talked about someone 4 centuries ago talking about the UBI. And I was wondering, was that, I think his name was John Hook, the lawyer in England who organized a group of judges, I should say, to help separate Charles I's head from his shoulders?
You were wondering who it was 400 years ago?
Yes.
You know, that's the sort of thing I should have right on the tip of my tongue, and I don't exactly remember who it was who came up with this concept. I believe it might have actually been, and I'm just going to pull this right out of thin air, it might actually have been Thomas More, but I'm not certain of that. If you head on over to my website, I'm sure it's there somewhere. There's a whole section on basic income. I can tell you that it was introduced 50 years ago by Milton Friedman in the United States, and it was almost passed through Senate. So that sort of shows you that the most libertarian guy that on the planet was proposing this, and Nixon was behind it, and it almost happened. It ran into some distortions along the way. Some people didn't want to see it happen, and of course we know that they have a great deal of power and influence under the right circumstances. So, no, I cannot remember who it was 400 years ago. My bad, but I'll look it up and I'll post it on the Facebook page for West Hill. You'll find it there somewhere.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions right here in the front?
Thank you very much, Andrew. You mentioned that the Canadian Senate has now taken this up. What is the sense that how well will this be evaluated, or already are political forces marshaling to fight this initiative?
Good question. It's really got to be a national initiative, but the interesting thing is that it's happening at lower levels. All kinds of municipalities have voted in favor of a UBI of some sort. Hamilton is one. There's a bunch of others. I think Kitchener-Waterloo was one recently. In St. John's, New Brunswick. Prince Edward Island, unanimously across 3 parties, called for a basic income in Prince Edward Island. They just needed federal support. So it's growing. It's been there for a long time. One of the game changers was COVID-19. Because what happened during COVID-19? We introduced the CERB benefit so that everyone was getting this benefit. And suddenly, you can have all the pilot projects you like. There was one in Manitoba. There was one in Ontario that ran for 3 years of basic income, which proved all kinds of benefits and so on, and none of the really disastrous outcomes that everyone was worried about. But we actually saw with the CERB, people were saying mental health issues dropped, crime dropped. People were realizing that they were thinking about what was important in life differently when they knew that some money was showing up in the bank every month, and that was no longer the huge consumption of mental resources that it used to be. And that was interesting that COVID-19 had that effect, where people were saying, why can't we do this all the time? We do it with health care. We make sure that people are fed and have a place to sleep when they have a broken leg. Why wouldn't we do that all the time? And so, yeah, it does actually have some traction and may, in fact, take place. But it's going to need support. It's going to need a lot of push. It's going to need more municipalities talking about it. It's going to need more provinces talking about it. It's going to need champions. And by golly, that's where you guys come in.
Any further questions, either in the hall or online? Over here.
Wait for me, wait. I think you're still live.
Hear my heart. In light of that time when we were having universal income, or I can't remember the name of it that you just referred to, during COVID, we stopped at a plant greenhouse type place where I wanted to buy something, and the place was in a terrible mess. Weeds all over the place, plants tipped over, and I spoke to the person who was running it. I said, "What's going on here?" And she said, it's CERB. We can't get anybody to work because the people that used to work here are now staying home on their income.
Yep, that's very true. And one of the problems with the way CERB is not a basic income. CERB was only targeted at people that were already working, so it left out all of the people that fell through the cracks, the students just out of university, the single mothers and so on. And so it did have a perception that it was only attached to people who already had a job, and they were thinking, well, why should I take the risks during COVID-19 of going into a workplace when I can just stay at home and get these checks coming in? That's very true. But what they found when they actually have a basic income in the various pilots all over the world is that it does not lower the interest in people working. For one thing, it's rarely an income that anyone would want to live on. Unlike CERB, if you had $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 a year. That's not going to get you anywhere, really. But it's a game changer. It's a paradigm shift. So what they found in various pilots around the world is people did not stop working. In fact, there was one in California, in Stockton, California. They gave people $250 a month. That was it. But that was enough. People said, wow, I have worth. What can I do with that $250? Maybe I can buy that suit and go out for a job interview, something I was never able to do before, and actually get a job. It turned people's lives around for $250 a month because it's a gift. Because it inspires a change in value thinking, right? Humans do not want to stop working. I bet you've all stopped working and didn't like it. You want to be productive. You want to be doing things, but you want to do things that you choose to do that address your gifts and your values to society, rather than saying, well, I'm sorry, you might be an artist, but there's no money in the arts, so you better start working at the checkout and at the bar on Fridays. It's a chance to take the gifts that we've been given, not just from a government check in the bank balance, but a gift from a higher being, if you believe that, or from nature herself that gave you the set of genes to give you the skills and insights that you've got, and put them to use the way you were meant to put them to use. And not have that mean that your survival is no longer your right.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.